Hi everyone, I'm Claire and I'm going to talk to you all today about industrial heat. So first, a little bit about me. Like everyone else in this room, I'm an MBA, MS, E-IPER dual degree. Prior to coming to Stanford, I started off my career in investment banking and worked in business and corporate and development for a few years. And over the past 2 years here, I've really spent my time digging into the world of climate tech. And after graduation, I'm going to be joining a venture capital firm called PIVA Capital that focuses on industrial decarbonization. And that's really where my project was born from, in that industrial heat is an area of focus and interest for us. Industrial heat is not something that most of us think about on a day-to-day basis, but it affects almost everything that we can see around us. But because it is so ubiquitous in our world, it's also an enormous source of emissions, and it desperately needs innovation, entrepreneurship, and capital to decarbonize. Yet most investors lack the expertise necessary to make a smart and impactful investment in this space. So because it's so little known, the first step of my project was to communicate and understand the scale of the problem, and I'll share that with you today as well. So if you break down all of the global energy end uses in our world, half of it is in the form of heat. And about half of heat goes towards cooling and heating buildings, but the other half goes towards industry. And most of that heat that's consumed by industry is created by combusting fossil fuels, making industrial heat responsible for 10% of global emissions. So once that problem statement is clear, the idea of my project was to lay out the various pathways for decarbonization and form a perspective on what the most attractive options were. And I'll share a very condensed version of that analysis and recommendation with you all today. So there are multiple pathways for decarbonization, and then they can be mainly grouped into 3 categories. 1, avoiding combustion, 2, cleaner combustion, or 3, reducing demand for heat. And those pathways can be broken down further into various strategies. And within those strategies, there are also multiple technological pathways that you could take. In my project, I focused on this branch of avoiding combustion. Cleaner combustion and demand reduction certainly have roles to play in decarbonizing heat. But topics like hydrogen and carbon capture are super broad subjects in themselves that could be entire projects, and they go well beyond the scope of industrial heat. So today, for time's sake, we're focusing on this pathway of avoiding combustion. But even within this pathway, there's at least 5 different technological pathways that you could take. So first, I needed to come up with a framework for consideration and prioritization of these technologies. So I came up with these 3 criteria. First is, what is the addressable market, which here is basically synonymous with what is the addressable temperature range. Different technologies are capable of addressing different temperature ranges, and different industries require different temperature ranges. So temperature and market size is closely correlated. Second, what is the levelized cost of heat? This is similar to the concept of levelized cost of electricity that a lot of us might be familiar with, but essentially it's a standardized financial metric that you can use to compare the costs of different sources of heat on a like-for-like basis. The important thing here is that there's a near-term path to cost competitiveness with fossil fuels. Because heat is a commodity, if it's not competitive with fossil fuels, it's unlikely to gain commercial traction. And third, what is the availability of this technology? And that is availability across multiple dimensions, from natural resource availability, physical availability to technical availability. And what you want is a technology that's readily available in the near term across your target markets. So when you compare your 5 electrification and renewable technologies against these 3 considerations, what I found was that nuclear and geothermal are not projected to be LCOH competitive in the near term. And solar thermal also has limitations around the natural resource requirements and land requirements. So I chose to focus my analysis on these 2 strategies of electrification of industrial heat through industrial heat pumps and thermal energy storage. These 2 technologies are also highly compatible in that industrial heat pumps address low to medium temperatures of up to about 200 to 250 degrees, and thermal energy storage can address higher temperatures of up to 1800 degrees Celsius. Another reason that this space is so attractive is that there's a lot of innovation and startup activity and capital flowing into this space. So there's a strong ecosystem there already. And through my project, I talked to a lot of the companies that you see on this page to learn about their technologies and teams and business models. And the output ended up being quite detailed, but I'll sum it up for you in 2 pages, one for heat pumps and one for thermal energy storage. So starting with heat pumps, like residential heat pumps, which is Pat and Oren's favorite topic, industrial heat pumps move heat from one place to another using electricity. And because of the mechanism of moving heat instead of creating heat, they have an efficiency advantage of 2 to 3 times more efficient than natural gas. Most startups in the industrial heat pump space have been innovating on their product designs to push up the upper bound of addressable temperatures. Previously, temperatures were limited to 100 degrees Celsius or less. Now with these new innovations, temperatures are reaching 200 to 250 degrees Celsius, which opens up a number of new industrial applications. However, a lot of these startups are quite early in proving out their technical ability to meet these super high temperatures, so there's still a good amount of technical risk remaining. On the economic side, for LCOH, the costs of fuel have become more attractive in that electricity prices have gone down and natural gas prices have gone up in certain geographies due to a combination of market factors like the war in Ukraine and to carbon taxes. On the CapEx side as well, startups are innovating to bring down that cost by simplifying their system designs and achieving economies of scale. So in sum on this page, on the venture side, PIVA invests in the Series B stage, so heat pumps are still a little bit early for us given the technical risk remaining, but a really good space to keep an eye on as these companies continue to develop over the next couple of years. And on the company side, there may be an opportunity to engage in early demonstration partnerships with some of these startups. So for thermal energy storage is similar to any other type of storage in that it heats up when electricity prices are really low and then discharges a continuous stream of heat. And again, the startups here are pushing up the maximum addressable temperatures and have gotten hot enough to be able to address some of the most heat-intensive industries like cement and steel. On the economic side, their economics depend on being able to charge at extremely low costs of electricity for at least a few hours a day, which oftentimes requires pretty creative economic arrangements. On the CapEx side, they're working on pushing down that cost through their choice of storage materials and system designs, which trade off between cost, energy density, flexibility, safety, and a number of other factors. So a couple of these startups are reaching commercial inflection points, making them strong candidates for investment. For example, there's 2 thermal energy storage companies called Antora and Rondo that you may have heard of that are right here in the Bay Area. We've actually been talking to both of them. So these 2 companies, among the other companies that we discussed, illustrate why venture capital is crucial to decarbonization, and that they're very capital-intensive businesses that need investors willing to take on the risk to bridge them to profitability. So the hope is that with this thesis, it helps investors get more comfortable in this space and understand the value propositions and risks and deploy capital in a more informed way. That should hopefully accelerate the decarbonization of 1/10 of global emissions that industrial heat creates and help us reach our net zero goals. Thank you.
Awesome presentation, Claire. Curious, I know you said heat pump space a little early for PIVA now, but are there any companies that excite you even in the very early stages?
Yeah, definitely. One unique company is an American company called Atmos Zero, and their differentiator is that the source of their heat is the direct ambient air. Most of the other heat pump companies are utilizing waste heat from other parts of the industrial facility. So obviously that's a lot more challenging in that they're starting from a lower temperature and still trying to achieve that 200, 220 degrees Celsius range. And they're still proving out how they're going to be able to do that. But the benefit is that it simplifies the product design. Instead of connecting the waste heat source to the heat sink source, you can just connect it to the outside air and it becomes much easier to implement in the facility.
I'm curious about the optimal temperature ranges that are economically most viable right now, because so heat pumps you mentioned going up to 200 degrees Celsius. and thermal storage 1,800. I can imagine that for both of those solutions, there's an optimal range and a maximum range. What are some of the applications right now that you think are within the optimal range? And what do you think the kind of earlier, similar to earlier, like what are the stages of who do you go after first on the demand side?
Yeah, so optimal range, generally the broader temperature range that you can address, the more applications you can address. So for heat pumps, the difference between being able to reach 100 degrees Celsius versus being able to reach 250 is actually pretty significant because there's a ton of variation in temperature requirements at that range. Some of the industries that use that's still considered low temperature heat because it can go up to 1,000, 2,000 degrees. But at that low temperature range, some of the industries that use that sort of heat is food and beverage for things like cooking and cleaning, paper and pulp for things like burning lignin. So some of those industries might be good ones to initially start out at. For the thermal storage companies, because they're less economically attractive at those lower temperatures than heat pumps are, they're better suited to the higher temperature ranges. And even company by company, there's different temperatures that each can reach. So it sort of depends.
Excellent presentation. And I'm curious, what's the usual input that you're replacing with these solutions? Would it be coal? Would it be natural gas? Usually, what are we looking at to heat?
Yeah, typically it's natural gas, but other sources of combustion include coal, especially in other parts of the world outside of the US, oil, biomass in some places, but largely natural gas.
Thank you, Claire. I know nothing about heat, but I guess something that came up in my mind is how do we think about like the directionality of heat requirements? So with alternative technologies of like different ways to make cement potentially at lower temperatures, like is the idea that we will always still need to be solving for these very high temperatures, or is there some thought process around, well, maybe actually these assumptions will change?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a portfolio of strategies. So alternative processes would fall under this category of demand reduction. Energy efficiency and circularity falls under that category as well. Definitely something that's needed, especially for things like steel and cement that are so emissions intensive, but it's going to be a portfolio approach, I think, to decarbonization. So while that's happening in parallel, you could decarbonize the heat, or in different places, it might make more sense. The other thing I'll mention is that I talked about electrification. Not all facilities are able to be electrified because of grid and load constraints. So for the facilities that can't be electrified, other forms of decarbonization like carbon capture or alternative processes would be needed. Thank you.